Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om, peace, peace, peace. And good evening. Nice to be back with you after the summer break. We are going to continue reading selections from the complete works of Swami Ramakrishnananda, who is often called the Apostle to the South, because Swami Vivekananda sent him to establish the centers down in the southern part of India. The people that he knew down there were very orthodox, and he knew that Swami Ramakrishnananda could be just as orthodox or more so than they were. And so he thought that that would be a good match. And so he's made several collections of the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna as he remembered them. And this is the third of the collections that he has in these complete works. They were serialized in Prabhupada Bharata and collected in various places, but we're going to read them as they're presented in his complete works, volume 1. All right, so Atma's here with us again to read. We're going to start with the first selection in this grouping.
Just as by day the sky appears starless to men due to the overwhelming brilliant lights of the sun, in the same way, not being able to perceive the all-pervading reality in this world and blinded by the power of ignorance, worldly men say that the world is godless. During the day in the sky, due to the influence of sunlight, not a single star is visible. But to conclude that there are no stars in the sky is not a right decision. In the same way, due to the influence of Maya, one does not see God in this movable and immovable world, and hence, well, there's no God. Such a conclusion is also a delusion.
So that's an interesting analogy. We don't usually use light in a negative sense. We usually think that light is going to enlighten us. But this is an interesting example where if you want to see the stars, obviously the sun is so bright you don't. Having been somewhat of a amateur astronomer, it's interesting that even at night when the full moon is up, the stars are much harder to see than they are when the moon is new. That's why you'll find star parties are almost always done in the first, between new moon and the first quarter moon, because of that brightness. Also, if you know where to look, you can see some of the brighter planets even during the day. If you start tracking the planet just before dawn, when the planet's still up, and you put your telescope on it, even during the day, you can track it and see it in the telescope if it's something like Jupiter or Saturn that's quite bright. So if you know where to look, the telescope will give it to you. But other than that, the best thing is to have as little light pollution as possible. And of course, sounds terrible to call the sun light pollution, but during the day, that's what it is. So the analogy is really very good, that when something like that can obscure what it is you're trying to see. So let's go on to number 2.
Can the abundance of salt in seawater be known by anybody without tasting it a little? Similarly, can anyone experience the presence of the all-pervading power of God in this world without purifying the mind by earnest spiritual practices. Oh, the seawater is full of salt. One does not come to know this by looking at the sea. One has to taste the seawater. But in the same way, this world is full of God's power. But one cannot understand by looking at the world. One has to make special effort and do spiritual practices.
Yeah, that's a good analogy to explain again why we don't necessarily see God in everything in the world, even though theoretically everything has to be with Brahman. One of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna said, Brahman alone is real and all is Brahman. And so we don't normally see that everything in the world is Brahman, but because it's covered with Maya, but it's still in there. It's within everything that we're experiencing, and that's one of the goals of spiritual life is to be able to see that God is in everything in the world, but not to be deluded by the disguise. Somewhat like a magician. If one magician is watching another magician and he already knows how the trick is done, he's not fooled by the trick, but he still sees the trick. And the trick looks exactly like it does to everybody else, but he knows exactly how it's done. And so the spiritually enlightened one can see this world, but is not deluded by it and knows that it is nothing but Brahman. So that's like not knowing the salt is in the sea without being able to taste it. All right.
Just as a vulture soaring high in the sky has all its attention focused on the rotten corpses below, so the mind of worldly-minded pundits always seeks delight in the vain and vulgar pleasures of this world, like money, name, fame, and so forth. Vulture flies high in the sky, but its eyes are fixed on the rotten and decaying dead bodies only. The same way one finds, although there are many pundits who are well read in scriptures and highest Vedanta, yet they're busy with insignificant things such as fame, name, and money.
All right, so that's a good illustration that you don't want to just know the scriptures for the sake of knowing the scriptures or for the sake of showing off or the sake of winning a debate and showing everybody how smart you are. That's not the goal of learning the scriptures. Learning the scriptures and reading the scriptures is supposed to put your mind in the proper frame so that you continue to pursue your spiritual practices. So that's the point of this little parable. All right, we've got a long one now. This is about the fisherwoman.
Once some fisherwomen carrying a basket full of fish went to sell fish in a faraway village market. The whole day went off in selling and purchasing. And with empty baskets on their heads, they headed towards their houses. Now, after walking through some fields, they reached near a village. Just then, the sky became overcast with clouds. Strong winds began to blow. Clouds began to thunder, and lightning began to strike. Like sharp arrows, the rain began to hit, and dense darkness of night began to fall. Searching for a shelter with anxiety, the eyes of fisherwomen, by God's grace, fell on the house of a flower seller. They rushed to the flower seller's house. Fortunately, the flower seller was a devotee of God and kind. And seeing those fisherwomen in trouble, he took them to a portion of a house in his garden and asked them to spend the night there. The first part of the night got over, the rain and wind almost stopped. Thunder almost stopped. and like pieces of crystal, stars began to shine in the sky. Pleasant winds began to blow gently, putting all people in the lap of sleep. The sweetness-filled night as if had incarnated on the earth. Gentle wind, fragrant with the fragrance of flowers, tenderly rocked the member of the flower seller's family to sleep. But to the smell, which was not experienced before touching their nostrils, and by not getting the smell of rotten fish, which they used to get in their houses, the fisherwomen were not getting any sleep. They're changing sides on their beds, and the last one of them said, "Oh, sisters, by getting shelter in a flower seller's house, the cruel Creator has put us in trouble. We're not able to close our eyes even for a second." Well, hearing her words, her companion said, "Oh, what misery God has put on us, putting us in such a dirty place." Like this, not able to sleep, the one fisherwoman who was most intelligent of them all, she came out with a solution and said, "Sisters, I will have one solution. By following it, all of us can sleep peacefully." And hearing her words, other women companions asked with great eagerness, "Oh, tell us what that solution is." She said, "Well, all of you wet your fish baskets with water, and then keep them under your head. And the smell of a rotten fish will surely bring good sleep." Listening to her suggestion, by pondering over the truth of her statement, all followed her suggestion. And by getting the stench of fish, which removed the fragrance of flour, they soon fell into deep sleep and even began to snore. With the help of this story, Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna Deva has shown the primacy of one's nature and temperament, born of repeated actions and thoughts. Due to his long habit of bad company, a wicked person cannot bear the company of a holy man. His inclination towards bad company only attracts and charms him. The one who is attached to lust and greed cannot give up his attachment and make his mind absorbed in the pure Satchidananda, who is the embodiment of ever-existing Para-Brahman.
Yes, so perhaps an updated example might be someone who's used to going to nightclubs and spending long hours with very loud music and getting inebriated, and then being taken to a temple or a church or synagogue and experiencing a serene religious service. They might feel very out of place. They might think, gee, this is really dull, and long for the loud, noisy atmosphere that they're used to. So we are strange creatures that we get used to certain things, and then when we don't have them, things seem odd. We get used to the noises in our environment. And if you're in a different place where the noises are different, they might not be any louder or any more annoying in general, but if you're not used to them, you might find them annoying. So for example, crickets, you might be lucky enough to spend some time out in nature, and you're trying to fall asleep, and then you hear crickets, crickets, and you're finding it hard to go to sleep. Whereas you might be used to trying to sleep next to the 101 freeway like we do here. And once you've been here a while, you just get used to the 101 freeway. But crickets might be kind of annoying. So that is our dilemma. But hopefully we can train ourselves to get more and more attuned to a spiritual atmosphere and enjoy having a spiritual atmosphere rather than a non-spiritual atmosphere. All right, we'll continue here.
Whatever men and women practice all their lives becomes their confirmed nature. And they always follow this inherent nature of theirs. They even give up good things due to their bad habits. It is therefore advisable for intelligent men and women to practice spiritual disciplines with earnestness and be sharers of pure divine bliss.
So that's his commentary on the fisherwoman's story. All right. Now these, some of these next ones are quite short. They're like little aphorisms. So we'll read maybe a couple of them before we stop for comments.
As a miser has a very strong yearning for gold, even so be thy yearning for the service of God. As when the fruit grows from the flower, the petals thereof disappear by themselves, so when true knowledge comes, vanity leaves.
So if you don't spend a lot of time with plants, that might not mean a lot to you, but some plants, the fruit is already rather visible while the flower is blooming. For example, gourds and pumpkins and squash and so forth. You can see a mini version of the vegetable, which is really a fruit, forming. And then, of course, the flower fades and the fruit begins to swell. Other kinds of flowers, you might not be aware that the fruit is being developed at all for many, many weeks after the flower has disappeared. And just very, very slowly the little fruit develops. So it varies from one plant to the next. But the analogy that Sri Ramakrishna is trying to get across is that the more you go towards the west, the further you are away from the east. So the things drop off by themselves the more you pursue your spiritual practices. So sometimes people worry that they still have some tendencies they'd like to get rid of, but the important thing is just simply continue going towards the spiritual goal, and eventually those undesirable things will fall off. All right.
So long as the clouds of desire cover the broad expanse of our heart, how can there be any possibility of the sunshine of true knowledge?
Yeah, so now we're getting the opposite analogy that we had in the first one, now using the sunshine as symbolizing knowledge, and clouds are what are covering the knowledge. So, but both analogies, something is covering the thing that you want to see. The first one, the sunshine is covering the stars that you wanted to see, and now the clouds are covering the sunshine that you want to see. And so the point is the same, that we want to remove the clouds of ignorance, the clouds of desire, the clouds of the ego, in order to perceive the sunshine of true knowledge. All right.
So long as the bee is outside the flower, it emits a buzzing sound. But no sooner that it is inside the flower, then it becomes at once silent.
And that might be something hard for people in a city like this to experience if you're living near a lot of traffic. You probably can't hear the buzzing of the bee, but that's indeed true. They do, their flapping of their little wings and so forth creates a buzzing sound. And so you hear them buzzing, and then they get into the flower, and of course they stop flapping their little wings, and it becomes quite silent as they enjoy getting the nectar out of the flower. All right.
Similarly, the learned man, so long he wants to show his pedantry by big, high-sounding arguments on scriptural texts, as long as he does not realize the Almighty, the end and aim of all Shastras.
So it's a similar conclusion as the vulture keeping the eye on his rotting flesh that he wants to eat on the ground. So, all right.
When through God's grace he at last sees disperse, the sun shines in all its glory. So when Maya goes away, the Lord is revealed everywhere.
Yeah, I think there's a word missing there. It's the ignorance is dispersed, or something is dispersed. It doesn't say what's being dispersed, but it would be the clouds that are covering the sun, or something is being dispersed like that, so that the sun can shine in all its glory. And so you want Maya to go away. So Maya's not easy to get to go away. Maya is the nature of the universe that we're experiencing. So in order to get Maya to go away, to reveal the Lord, you have to do a lot of spiritual practices. All right. This looks like a parenthetical note here.
And when he attains true devotion through his grace, then being satisfied by his vision, he becomes quiet.
So we're still in even though these are all numbered with a different number, they're all referencing the analogy of the bee buzzing before it hits the flower and sucks the nectar. All right.
When the mind becomes covered and soiled with ignorance, it does not reflect God. Does a mirror covered ever with dirt ever reflect any image? As the clouds cover the sun and the sky, so ignorance hides and conceals the Lord. But when the clouds disperse, the sun shines in all its glory. So when Maya goes away, the Lord is revealed everywhere.
And Sri Ramakrishna used to say that the ego is the biggest obstacle. Once you realize that you're not the doer, that's the key of breaking through the spell that Maya has on you, so that the Lord is revealed. So that's something to remember here as we're thinking of how are we going to get these clouds to stop covering the sun and the sky. So the idea is to lessen our ego every day. All right.
As in the troubled sea surface, the broken images of the moon are reflected and made as if it were to dance. So in the unsettled, though pure mind of a worldly man, the partial images of God appear at times. As the darkness of thousands of years suddenly vanish from inside a room by just striking a lamp, so the accumulated impulses and impurities of thousands of births at once vanish from the mind by just a particle of divine grace.
Yes, so that's often used as an analogy for meditation, that you want to see the depths of your mind uncluttered with the thoughts that usually clutter the mind. Our sense organs are constantly bringing in information, and the mind is interpreting it and reacting to it and comparing it to old memories and coming to conclusions and putting things into pigeonholes and so forth and so on. And so you have to try to still the senses to the point where the mind isn't getting all those waves. Now that's not very easy. So usually we suggest that people start by replacing all the distracting thoughts of all sorts of random things that are all disconnected and one thing jumping into another, and you hear something over here and you hear something over here and you see something over there and you smell something, and all of those distracting thoughts, difficult to just quiet them all down. But if you replace them with the thought of God, that will help the mind to calm down and to sort of blanket out the other thoughts in the mind. Your mind can't think of too many things at once, hopefully. And so if you replace all of those thoughts with just the thought of God, then you can let the mind calm down. So, for example, someone might have a mantra, and the mantra relates to a particular deity or an incarnation of God. And so they repeat the mantra so that their auditory centers in the brain are busy, and they visualize the image of that chosen ideal. And so their visual cortex is also kept on track. And by repeating the mantra over and over and fixing the mind on the image of the chosen ideal, the waves of the mind will gradually settle down to one very calm, undulating wave where it doesn't disturb the surface of the mind to the extent that it obscures what's at the bottom. Similar to a swimming pool, if you've got a dozen people jumping in and out of the swimming pool doing cannonballs, and you've got maybe a ball or a frisbee at the bottom of the pool. You can't, the image is just so broken up, you can't really even tell what it is. But if there were just one person standing at the side dipping a stick into the water, you'd get just a slow ripple going out over the surface of the water, and then you'd begin to see the image. And once the image begins to get clear and your mind begins to focus on it, then even the mantra begins to drop away, and your mind becomes one-pointed, and you're able to still the waves completely. All right, let's go on with the next one.
Why does a devotee whose mind is filled with God give up all wealth, name, fame, home, wife, and children? Well, as an insect, forgetting its enjoyments, cares little for its life and springs into the flame, or as a fly, carrying a fig for its life, falls into the honey pot with great glee. Even so, a devotee who has made God his sole refuge goes to him and forgets all other minor enjoyments.
So it's like the devotee wants to become sugar, not just taste sugar, and fall into the honey pot. I didn't comment on the other one about the darkness of the room, but that's again a common metaphor that grace can descend quite suddenly on a spiritual aspirant. So be of good cheer. You never know when that's going to happen. Swami Shraddhananda used to say, always go into the shrine thinking, well, it might be today that I am graced with the Lord's presence. And always keep that positive frame of mind as you go in for meditation. And as he would also say, and other direct disciples would say, today's imagination is tomorrow's realization. So you always keep that idea in mind that the Lord's grace will at some point descend. You simply just have to wait until the Lord realizes or decides that it's the proper time. All right, now we're down to 19 and 20, I guess.
There's one place water is called by some Yala, and by others Aqua, by some others Pani. So one God is called differently by different men as Allah, Jehovah, Iswara, and so forth.
Yeah, that's one of the common analogies for interfaith, which is timely thought, since yesterday was September 11th, which was the day that Swami Vivekananda gave his first talk to the Parliament of Religions in 1893, which really was the spark for the interfaith movement that is still going on today. They, as far as I know, they're still doing Parliaments of Religions every 3 years. That was started in 1993. They started doing parliaments on a more regular basis. And many churches and interfaith groups throughout the country and throughout the world have events and gatherings and discussions trying to better understand each other's faith tradition, because it's really a waste of time just finding faults and differences between various religions. That doesn't get you anywhere, and it probably just annoys the other people, so it doesn't get them anywhere. But to really appreciate and understand somebody else's faith is of great value, because sometimes it will help us to understand some aspect of our own faith that we didn't quite get. And then you see it from a slightly different perspective, from a different tradition, and sometimes a light bulb goes off in the mind and say, oh, yeah, no, that makes sense. And so there's a value to that. And of course, we don't want to be guilty of the, I don't know if we'll get to that today, but the analogy of digging a well in a zillion different places and never spending enough time digging a deep well in order to get water. That's not the point of interfaith work. You'll still be digging your well, but you might get deeper insights into how to dig your well, or the instructions that you have to dig your well. And so it's not flitting from one religion to the other and being a Jew on Saturday and a Christian on Sunday and a worshiper of Shiva on Monday and a worshiper of Divine Mother on Tuesday. Just for the fun of it, it's gathering information to help you in your spiritual path. And so you have to know what your spiritual path is and stick to it. All right, we have another parable here. This one's the parable of the chameleon.
Even now I've seen a beautiful chameleon of a bright red color, which has just now hid itself amongst thick leaves of the true fore branch of that tree. Now have you too seen this strange creature, brother? Said one of the two travelers to the other. The other said, oh yes, I've already seen that. But it's not red, it's yellow. The first wayfarer, hearing this, said, are your eyes affected with a jaundice, brother? Why do you then think yellow what is red, even like the red lotus? This jerk, the other replied, well, friend, I am neither jaundice nor my eyes are misleading. Now, had I seen red what is yellow, then, of course, my eyes would have been at fault. The Lord, in the beginning, created the chameleons yellow. This red chameleon must now be your own creation. And when they were thus quarreling between themselves, now a third person joined them, on which both of them eagerly asked him at once, now, brother, if you know right, now tell us truly, is this chameleon red or is it yellow? And hearing them, the third said, oh, both of you are right, because it's of various forms. Sometimes it becomes green. It assumes the color of a leaf. It becomes almost imperceptible among the leaves. There the keen-eyed creature waits for the insects destined to be its prey. It assumes diverse forms to suit itself to procure its food. The learned, therefore, always call it Bahurupa, of various forms, by observing its nature. Well, even so, the other men, knowing very little of the few different aspects of the infinite and universal Lord, eternally quarrel among themselves. You too, therefore, should give up bigotry after this. Broaden your views without reviling others' religion. For all such petty quarrels proceed from vanity and ignorance.
Yeah, and I often think that the different traditions often picture God differently, or they refuse to picture God in any form. But to my understanding, God is infinite and all-powerful and can take whatever form it needs to take. And so it takes the form that the devotee will understand. So this is why when you look at Hindu deities, they look like Hindus. They don't look Japanese or African American or African or Polynesian. They look Hindu. That's because the Hindu devotees have been praying and picturing God in a form that appeals to them and will relate to them. Similarly, you see accounts of people that have had visions, say, of Mother Mary or Jesus, and they'll see them slightly differently. They won't all be dressed the same or with the same facial features, and they will often be some reminiscent of the culture that they're part of. And so, or the one that they picture Jesus was a part of, even though Europeans tend to picture them more European than Middle Eastern. But similarly, the chameleon, sort of in the opposite sense, the chameleon takes a color so people won't see him. God takes different forms so that people will see him and understand him. And so the deities are part of Maya. They're not outside of Maya, they're part of Maya. But they're the sattvic part of Maya. They're the part of Maya that reveals the truths of the ultimate reality and all the different powers and functions that the ultimate reality has to take on in order to manifest a universe. So that's why in Hinduism we have deities that have many arms, because they have to hold many symbolic implements. And each of those implements then symbolizes one of the aspects or powers that that particular deity represents. So it's a good analogy, this idea of the chameleon. I have a musical version, but I didn't set that up, but we could listen to that later if I set it up. So we'll continue. We just have a few more minutes today, so we'll continue with the next group of teachings that Swami Ramakrishnananda remembered.
As a pane of glass being smeared on one side with mercury reflects images of whatever is put before it, so the heart of an abstemious man who has never wasted his energies begins to reflect the image of God like a mirror.
Yes,
As all gas pipes proceeding from one common central store light the different streets and houses of a town with varied intensities, so the avatars, proceeding from the one Almighty God, they take their births in different countries of the world, among different nations, and shed light of their intelligence throughout the world.
Has anybody tried to smear mercury on a piece of glass? That sounds like a very challenging thing to do, but maybe you can do it. But anyway, of course, the point of the story is that you want to purify your heart and mind in order to be a good reflector of God. And that's why we study the lives of saints and avatars, and why we sing hymns of praise and study scriptures and so forth, is because by contemplating the aspects of the various incarnations or the deities, those aspects are more apt to manifest within us. It's just like, in a very ordinary sense, if you want to be a good tennis player, you watch a lot of tennis matches of very good players playing tennis. watching golf matches probably wouldn't be as interesting and probably wouldn't do you as much good. But if you want to absorb the good qualities of a tennis player, you watch the tennis pros. You don't watch the people that don't know what they're doing trying to play tennis. And that goes for anything. If you want to learn to play an instrument, you listen to experts playing those instruments. So anything you want to be good at, you look for role models and you study the role models. And then the expertise of the role models begins to rub off on you, as it were. Then the second one used the analogy of gas pipes proceeding from one central source and going into all the various houses. Of course, in Sri Ramakrishna's day, that was the way streets were lit. They were lit with gas pipes that would go into various houses and into the different streets and so forth. That was before electricity. Now it's the same analogy with electricity. Electricity comes from one source and it lights all sorts of different light bulbs. They might shine with a yellowish glow. You know, you can have options now if you go buy light bulbs. Do you want an intense white light, and you want a bluish white light, you want a yellowish white light, you want a colored light, you get all sorts of light bulbs. But the electricity running through the light bulb is going to be coming from the same source and just manifesting differently. So God takes birth in different countries and takes on characteristics of those countries. The avatars have to speak to a populace that has a particular mindset, that knows particular ways in their particular world. They know how the world works in their part of the country, the climate and the kinds of food they eat and so forth. So they use those kinds of things as analogies so that they can comprehend the teachings that they're trying to get across. So that's why we're so fortunate to have Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Sarada Devi coming so recently that they can speak to a more an era that's a little closer to ours, although the cultures changes so rapidly now. Maybe the avatars are going to have to come more quickly than they used to. But fortunately, we can still relate to the things Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother related to. All right, that's pretty much the time we have for tonight. And next week, we will have our monthly sound bath meditation, our crystal bowl meditation. So please join us for that. And then we will pick up again the next week with more teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om, peace, peace, peace.